I've learned a lot about hiring and how to run the hiring process in the many different places that I have worked in my career. The place where I think I learned the most was absolutely at Amazon. Great process. I spent a handful of years there running the Kindle product management team. I was responsible for hiring, dozens of people, was on loops for not quite 100, but quite a number of people, and took away a lot of best practices out of the Amazon interview process. And I'm going to share those with you here. Whether you are interviewing or running an interview loop, there's something to get out of this for you, whether it's how to prepare for the interviews and how to think about the process, or how you can run a more effective process at your company. I'm going to teach you how to do it. It has 3 specific parts. Number 1, the phone screen. Number 2, the on-site. Number 3, the debrief. We'll dive into each of those in this video, a little bit more depth, and we'll sum it up at the end. The phone screen is a critical part of the process. Essentially, it is a very low-cost way for a company to assess a handful of candidates, a large number of candidates, very quickly, whether or not they're worth bringing on campus or to the site, or even setting up a full loop, because obviously a lot of these interviews are happening via video these days. Phone screens themselves should be no more than, say, 30 minutes. Sometimes they can go 45, sometimes they can go an hour, but really, if you think about the number of 1-hour slots that you have in your day, especially if you're the hiring manager. And by the way, I do recommend that the hiring manager or a trusted lieutenant is doing the phone screens, because that's the only way you're going to get a serious read on whether or not this person that you are interviewing on the phone has the abilities to at least get through a full slate of interviews. Leaving this to your HR manager or partner is a little bit tough, because they may not have the experiences you have, and they're certainly not involved in the day-to-day decision making that you have going on in your team. It's going to be hard for them to assess what it is you need exactly within your organization, and therefore make a successful screen pass through to a full-time interview slate. First part of the interview on the phone screen should just be introduction of the role, right? Let's talk about the role as needed, right? If you're Amazon, you don't need to introduce Amazon, but if you're not Amazon, you need to introduce the company, because sometimes the person on the other side of the phone, they don't know who you are, right? They know a little bit about you maybe, but they'd love to hear it straight from your mouth. You should have this down, 5-minute pitch, be done, talk about the role, talk about the company. Second part of the call is talk a little bit more about the role. Why was the role created, right? Why is the company looking outside of the company instead of inside with internal employees to fill the role? What are the key traits that are desired for a candidate to be successful in this role? The main part of this call should be a single question. After you've answered all of those basic premise questions and you've delivered that information to the candidate, it's time to move on to the meat of the call, which is a single question. It's easy to get cute in a phone screen and try to assess for all the things. And I get it. I've already stated up front, it's expensive to bring somebody on for a full slate. You have to coordinate a bunch of schedules. It can be hard. I understand. But spend too much time on the phone and you can get too cute, and you're just wasting everybody's time. And more importantly, you're wasting valuable time inside the business on these long calls. One question will tell you everything you need to know is whether or not this person can at least pass the initial sniff test of, are they good enough to work here? So what we talk about at interview all the time is leadership principles. I like to use the Amazon leadership principles more than anything in my interview processes, because, well, it worked. When I was running the Amazon Kindle product management team, this is, I learned this process, which is sit down with your team. What role are we hiring for? More often than not, I was hiring for a product manager, but what role are we hiring for? Pick the 6 or 7 leadership principles that matter the most for that role and that level of hire. It's going to change and adjust below. And incidentally, I have a grid somewhere that I can make available. If people want that grid, go ahead and leave roles by type or leadership principles by role. Put that in the comments down below, and that'll give me some good feedback that people want to see that content. But I have a gigantic grid that has, kind of roles and levels and all the leadership principles and little check marks and X's as to whether or not it matters for that role. Decide on what the leadership principles are for the entirety of the position that you're hiring for. Pick one. The one that's most important for the phone screen. For a product manager, this is going to be customer obsession, probably. Could be write a lot, fine. Could be dive deep, sure. Could be deliver results, sure. Could be things big, but really customer obsession. Bias fraction is also a good strong one for product manager, but customer obsession really is what you care about the most. So pick one leadership principle, and most importantly, pick one question to ask on the phone. Why do you do this? Well, if you ask a variety of questions, you're gonna have to prep a bunch of different questions, which is just annoying, right? Because then you have to figure out, okay, well, what's the question I'm gonna ask this week? And do I have to prep? No. Have the one question ready to go, because you're gonna know all of your follow-up questions to that question. It's kind of a mental script you've got running in your head, but it also helps you calibrate the candidate that much better. You've had multiple candidates now come through your process. They've all been asked the same question. Don't worry about the question getting out. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You'll be able to better calibrate on the phone. How did this person do relative to all the other people we've spoken on the phone? Do we want to bring this person in for a full-time screen? Okay, Now let's assume that the person's past the phone screen. They're ready to come on site, or as we're doing now, video interviews across the interwebs to various home offices around the world with really crappy webcams and terrible backlit home offices with 720p camera and everyone looking a bit fuzzy. It's not great. So that's something you as a candidate need to think about, but as an interviewer, you also need to think about, because it's how you are presenting to the candidate, how you are, basically showing up and kind of delivering on the image of the company. As you're setting this up, if I'm the hiring manager, right, I have 4 to 6 people that are involved in this, 4 to 6 people that are doing roles that matter in the team that I want to talk to, that I want to have talk to this candidate. Ideally, it's 6. 4 is the bare minimum, right? But ideally, it's 6, because that way, with 6, everybody gets a single leadership principle. Remember, we talked about the 6 leadership principles that matter, right? For product management, generally, are right a lot, bias for action, customer obsession, delivers results, dives deeps, think big. Right? You could throw in insist on high standards, but sort of invent and simplify. Absolutely. It's going to depend on the level, but those 6, those are guaranteed winners for you. Everybody, let's assume a team of 6, everybody has a single leadership principle that they're going to focus on. And that's it. You have 45 minutes to an hour. Stick to your leadership principle. That's part 1. Part 2, everybody, and I mean everybody, has to take great notes. Why? Well, look, if you're interviewing a bunch of candidates, you're not going to remember who you spoke to. You're going to think you did, but you're not. So taking notes while you're interviewing a person is critically important. And I know there's people that like to complain, oh, they're clickety-clack, oh, they're checking their emails. No, we take great notes because we're talking to a bunch of candidates, and it's really important that we be able to have a thoughtful discussion about every candidate with thoughtful notes that we made during the interview, as well as after the interview. We'll get to that in a second, that we can then share with the rest of the team. So everybody has to take notes. This is a non-negotiable. Everybody has to take notes. At Amazon, we had just a terrible applicant tracking system. I think it was on Oracle software. It was just awful, but everybody's notes got copy and pasted into that. There's plenty of systems out there that can be used. If you don't, use a spreadsheet, and just everybody drop their note, a link to their whatever, Google Doc or Word Doc, whatever, but just everybody keep their notes that can be shared later, right? So you've got your process. Everybody does their interview. They've got their 1 leadership principle. They ask a handful of questions with good follow-up questions. The key thing that each participant in the interview is trying to assess: can this person do the job? That's it, right? Too often you hear about, oh, is this a fit? Or I like that person. Oh, they're really cool. None of that matters. Matters a little bit. None of that matters. What matters is, can they do the job? So everybody has to be trying to assess, can this candidate do this job in this company and work with this broad team, this specific team, but also the broader team? Everybody needs to be able to answer that question. Okay. So candidate comes on site, or you set up a handful of interviews that are done remote with each of your 4 to 6 people. Everybody knows their role. Everybody knows their leadership principle, and everybody, again, non-negotiable. Everybody in the loop is taking notes. Which brings us to part 3 of the process, the debrief. Now, Amazon has a bar raiser, and we're not going to spend time talking about the bar raiser here, because that is really a specialized role and position of immense trust and is earned, well earned. Anyone who knows a bar raiser, it is well earned. We're not going to talk about that here, but the hiring manager must then act as the bar raiser role for a variety of the tasks that the bar raiser normally handles. So if you're going to run a process like Amazon and you're going to run a debrief, the debrief must happen within 24 to 48 hours of the last interview, right? I understand the interviews are happening over multiple days, and that's fine, but you need to have that debrief in a short window of time after the conversations have had, which means people have to get their notes done after the interview. That's number 1. But number 2, you're not forgetting, you're not kind of losing track of the candidate. You're being thoughtful about getting back to the candidate, right? So you can have a discussion internally and then make a decision or not, right? So that's what that kind of enforces. So you got to have that tight time window. The meeting kicks off with everybody going around the table and vote. Everybody vote. There are only 2 acceptable answers: inclined and not inclined, or higher, no higher. There is no maybe. If you're a maybe, you're a no. You cannot sit on the fence in this vote. It is either higher, no higher. That's it. No matter what the outcome of that vote, all hires, all no hires, or kind of a mixed bag all the way around, you still go through the rest of the process, unless it's just a complete disaster and it was a no hire all the way around with it was clear and obvious that the person's not going to make it. That's fine. You don't need to spend a ton of time. But even when we've had 6 no hires, the rest of the process drove a change in sentiment in some of the people that were on the interview loop. And so it's important to understand what happens next. Now, the reason we do all the notes and we put them in the Word docs is because whoever's running the discussion shows up with all of the notes printed up, stapled together, and handed to everybody. So they can now go through and read the notes that everyone else wrote about their interview. Why do we do this? Well, we've just gone around the table and voted, but each one of us was responsible for our individual leadership principles. So if I was responsible for Think Big, I would love to know about Dive Deep. I would love to know about Deliver Results. I want to hear how the candidate did in other parts of the interview, because no feedback should be following the candidate throughout the day. Candidates shouldn't be penalized because they had a bad first interview, and then for the rest of the day they're wearing the scarlet no hire NH on their chest because some email went around. I was like, oh, this person's terrible, and then it just colors the mindset of everybody who's going to be talking to that candidate for the rest of the day. So no feedback should be following the candidate through the day. I probably should have said that earlier, but everybody now sits and reads all the feedback. 10, 15 minutes max, right? But you're reading the notes that everybody wrote. Hopefully they're thoughtful. Hopefully they're coherent, usable. Everybody reads the notes and kind of gets a sense for, okay, I understand how this person went about Dive Deep. I understand how this person went about customer obsession, whatever the leadership principles that you didn't cover. But it's going to answer more of your own internal questions and maybe color your own opinions about where you thought the holes were in the candidate or where you thought they were very, very strong. Because it's entirely possible, again, if I was responsible for Think Big, that I saw elements of ownership or elements of customer obsession that I might have made notes to that effect. And so that it helps bolster a case or maybe detract from a case for a candidate, right? So now everybody's read the notes, okay? And the person running the meeting says, okay, now that everybody has read their notes, does anybody want to change their vote? And you go around the table again, tally the votes. This is really where the candidate stands, right? And now you can have thoughtful discussion, right? Let's discuss, why did you change your vote or why didn't you change your vote, right? Everybody then discusses their point of view, and then you do the final vote. Are we hiring or not hiring? Generally, you want all yes, but if you have 6 people interviewing, you might have 4 yes and 2 no's and still make a hire because the 2 no's are weak no's, but they're still no's. You want to raise the bar. That's, again, the bar raiser rule. You want to make sure you're leveling up your employee base. All that is true. You never, though, as a hiring manager, want to make a decision out of distress or stress, right? We really need to hire this person. Oh, they're good enough. Let's just hire them. Because look, the more senior you get with your hires, the more costly a bad decision can be, right? It could take you 12 to 18 months to recover from a bad director or higher level hire. Because one, they're going to get in, they're going to make some changes, they're going to ruffle some feathers, it's going to feel like, oh, this is honeymoon period. Then you're going to realize after about 6 months, they're not getting it done. Then you got to realize, oh, maybe we have to spin this person down, maybe put them on a PIP, and then we got to get rid of them. Then we got to hire a new person. It can be extremely expensive and extremely disruptive in an organization to get this hire wrong. So you should never, ever hire somebody because, oh, we have to, which is, again, why the bar raiser exists. It's someone who's outside of the team, but we're not going to, again, spend more time on that. Although, if you would like to see me talk about the bar raiser program, go ahead and type bar raiser in the comments and I'll be sure to create a video on that. So let's summarize what we've talked about here. 1, the phone screen. Critically important, should always be the same person to the extent possible, 1 or 2 people, and always, always, always use the same question because that way it's far easier for you to calibrate across your candidates. 2, the on-site or the kind of the full slate, right? Settle on what your 6 leadership principles are. If you have 4 people, you should still do 6, just give the 2 most trusted or most senior people 2 leadership principles to cover. Settle on your basket of 6 leadership principles. Make sure that they are covered. Make sure everybody is prepared. Make sure everybody has questions that they can ask, that they're not winging it in the interview. And everybody must take notes that will be saved and shared with the person running the loop. 3, the debrief. You come in, you vote, read notes, you vote again, you discuss, you make a decision. And that's it. The decision needs to be communicated immediately. You cannot sit on the fence on a candidate. You have to assume that they're talking to other people. It's either we're hiring this person or not hiring this person. Now, on a no hire, it could be no hire, let's talk to them again in 6 months, they're not ready to work here. Or it could be no hire, let's talk to them again in 2 years, they really need a lot more seasoning before they get here. Or it could be, gosh, this person's never going to clear the bar. We don't need to see this candidate again. It's rare that you get like a strong no hire, but that can happen. On the other side, we want to hire this person if we want to hire the person. But what about Joseph that we're talking to tomorrow or Mary that we're talking to next week? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You found your person, make your offer. If you're going to hire, you're going to hire. That's the person. It's not, well, we like this person, let's wait and see. No, you don't do that. 1, it's disrespectful to the candidates, but 2, you're just dragging your feet on making a hire. Maybe you didn't feel as strongly about that person as you thought you did. So once you reach a hire decision, you call the candidate. You offer them the job. Give them, 24 to 48 hours to accept the job, but Just get moving. Don't drag the process on any longer than it needs to. Now, what do you do with the candidate that's already in flight? Well, if the interview's already scheduled, absolutely still have the interviews. That's fine. But if you make the offer's accepted, contact the other candidates, let them know that the offer's been accepted. You got to cancel the rest of the interviews. If you're still really interested in that candidate, well, maybe you have other roles available for them, other teams. That's entirely possible. And that comes down to how you manage your inflow of resumes and candidates. But it really is important to kind of maintain good relations and good contacts, but treat people well in the process. One of the other key learnings I had in the Amazon process was basically everybody's an Amazon customer. So don't piss anybody off in the interview process. Don't treat somebody badly, right? You don't want to walk in the interview and think like, well, I'm never going to do business with them again. That's a bad outcome. Right? So treat everybody with respect, treat everybody with kindness, treat everybody how you would hope to be treated in the process. Don't leave people hanging for long periods of time. I hear this all the time, especially true with recruiters and headhunters where you just don't get back to people and they ghost people. I get it. Everybody's busy. I get it. But it's rude. It's just obnoxious, if we're being honest. Just obnoxious. So hopefully you found this content helpful. It's always interesting to get a peek into how other companies do it. Amazon's process is probably one of the best I've ever seen. I've interviewed at a bunch of places, received offers at a bunch of places, but their process for me was the best. That's why I continue to use it and have adapted it, added my own little flourishes here and there with best practices from other places. But it is a great process, and I hope everybody found useful here.